Well, this is the thing. Uh, I have a problem with the dispatch of the term radical because it's a term that people appropriate and wear like it's a T-shirt. You know what I'm saying? We have this show. We call it "This Is Revolution Podcast." It is a rhetorical name. None of us are talking about taking up arms to physically challenge the state, but we would like to believe that we are ideologically moving people in a direction where, not necessarily violently, they're trying to change the situation materially to make it a better place for as many people as possible with as much radical politics. But what that means for us is not going out and saying, Mao Mao the bourgeoisie, as many as some of us would like it. That means applying the most ideological and effective force on the status quo to compel it to make concessions to your demands, because it will take too much force to terminate the status quo and rebuild a new force, which will be what some people would consider a real revolution. My position to you is that no one out here is radical. We're not radical. No one on the left, black, white, or other ones is radical, because none of us are doing what it really takes to indulge in what would be necessarily the class warfare that would be required to be radical.
Well, radicalism has different aspects to it. There is the agenda, the objective, the goal. But there's also, to my thinking, there's another aspect to radicalism, and that aspect is mobilizing masses of people. To the extent that you're mobilizing or attempting to mobilize masses of people, which is what the civil rights movement did. What made the civil rights movement such an extraordinary event was how deep were its roots in the most ordinary people, the most down and out people, the most powerless people, and that the capacity of the movement to bring alive those who had been completely, totally shut out of the political system and had no concept even of being active participants in the transformation of their lives. So
Norm,
even though the objectives you could say were not radical, in the language of the old left, the Marxist left, those were quote unquote. I'm not going to restore the language. I'm just going to use the language for a moment. Those were bourgeois democratic demands: the right to vote, the right to form unions. Those are all demands which historically have been seen as within the parameters of the capitalist system. But even as the goals may not have been radical, I still think the approach to politics, the attempt to bring in, mobilize, galvanize, and most importantly, enable people to feel the power that they possessed if they manage to act collectively, if they manage to find the right slogans and goals, which were both energizing and substantive and had a real possibility of being realized. Having said that, I consider, and we can argue and debate, and I hope you will, dispute me if you feel so inclined. Um, Slogans like a prison abolitionism. Now, you might say that's a radical goal and a radical objective. I think it's the most apolitical slogan humanly imaginable.
Mm.
It has nothing to do with the real world. That's why Angela Davis, with her friend Gina Dent, go around from one Ivy League school to another, and all the presidents of these schools introduce her with total exhilaration, nearly breathless, and then there are these all-white elite audiences who come to hear Angela speak about, and Gina Dent speak about
Prison
prison
abolition.
abolition, because it has nothing to do with the real world.
Well,
I
And
just want you to hold on, Norm, 1 second. I just want everyone to know. I got to say this before anything else. So we did have UC professors on the show. Norm made sure that never again will any professors from the UC system come on this show. Did you hear what he said, Pascal?
I think it was. I would like to respond if you would indulge me. I'm just up to you.
Look, hey, you know what? You've been
Yeah,
indulged.
no, I want to address that.
Mhm.
First of all, I want to. You said something interesting. You said that large numbers of white people go to hear all of these quote unquote radical slogans: abolish police, abolish, defund the police, Black Lives Matter, so on and so forth. First of all, let me address that. Number one, there is a saying from Harold Cruz that I was educated to by Cedric Johnson, one of my favorite political scientists who I like very much, who I would suggest you read more of because he critiques all of these phenomena.
he was my professor.
What'd you say?
No, Cedric Johnson. Not
Cedric
He
Cedric
was
Johnson,
Robinson.
not Cedric Robinson. Cedric
Cedric
Johnson.
Robinson. No,
Yeah.
Cedric Johnson. He was the fellow who ended up at Santa Barbara.
No. Cedric Johnson teaches at University
Yeah.
Cedric Johnson's like 50. Cedric
Yeah.
Robinson passed away recently,
Yeah.
2 years ago.
Cedric Johnson.
Yeah,
He has
I've read his stuff. I read it in Jacobin. I've read his stuff.
Yes, okay. There are, as you know, many on the black, well, maybe not know, on the black left who's taking this on, but that's besides my point. What I'm trying to say is that the quote from Harold Cruz is that one of the problems that the left has with black people is that they think that we're all storming the barricades ready for revolution. In other words, there are white people who consider themselves liberal, progressive, touchy-feely, or left, or whatever, who fetishize seeing Negroes look like they're ready for the Mau Mau. There might be some who watch this show.
I just want to add that I did say this on Saturday. So
Okay.
just remember.
I don't know what kind of perverse, kind of sick, kind of like exotic racial fantasy. Maybe it's like I'm seeing a monkey in the zoo kind of thing it triggers in their mind, but it's an actual reality.
I agree with that. But remember, that was part and parcel of what was called the revolutions in the third world. That was part of the 1960s, where many white radicals, genuine radicals like Paul Sweezy and others, thought that the white working class was hopeless, had been bought off. There was no possibility of revolution here. And so people looked to Cuba, to Latin America, to China. They looked to the third world. And the African Americans were seen as a component of that third world revolution. So it was not necessarily, though I totally agree with you, there is that element of the exotic and all the negative. And
It's frustrating.
I was part of it. I don't want to ever pretend that I'm holier than thou. I'll embarrass myself by saying I still remember when I was around 16 years old, I used to wear this like safari jacket, and here I had a black, red, and green button. You know,
Mhm.
uh, the Garvey button. But
Mhm.
I was part of all that. And part of the reason I wrote the book was it's a warning to young people. No, the book was not written for my age cohort because I knew they would hate it. I knew, when I started to have second thoughts about things like abortion, I knew I would lose everyone in my age cohort. But it was written for 20-year-olds because, as I said, their moment of truth is coming. We're heading in a very bad direction. So I wanted to say, don't do what I did. Don't make those mistakes. So I agree with you. There has always been that element of exoticizing black people and thinking all black people are on the ramparts. But on the other hand, you have to also admit that great the greatest transformation in the United States in the post-war era was the civil rights movement, and it did mobilize, unlike any other movement, it mobilized the grassroots of society. It was a truly heroic, deeply, deeply inspiring chapter in American history. And one of the